Hi, everybody. My name's Ruth Sternberg, and I am a coach working with job seekers to help them define their value and communicate with employers so they can get hired. I'm offering you a series of interviews with career specialists and leadership specialists and job seekers to give you confidence in the coming days. Today, I am talking with Perry Mommer. He is a facilitator and coach for relentless leaders. And today, Perry and I are going to be talking a little bit about how to lead yourself, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, during this time of lockdown when so many of us are uncertain about our professional futures. So Perry, tell folks just a little bit about what you do under normal circumstances, if there are any.
Yeah, well, whatever those are going to be now and in the future. I spend most of my time, I'm a facilitator, as you said, and a coach. And so a lot of that I do under the banner of Vistage, which is a peer advisory groups for CEOs and business owners. So I have a number of those groups here in Central Ohio and work with those folks. And then I also do team and individual leadership coaching. I do some limited one-to-one stuff, and then I engage with leadership teams of companies for them to gain alignment and clarity around their leadership vision for an organization.
Now, I've heard Perry speak a couple of times, and I believe that the things that you say about teams and groups are really applicable to individuals as well. And the one thing that we're all noticing about what's been happening with us lately is that we've lost control. And you've talked about control being the prime factor often in how people make decisions, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think the important thing for us to realize is we didn't really lose control. It just became apparent that we never had it.
Oh, that's a good point. You're right.
Because one of the things I tell people is we have this fallacy of control, and that really determines our behavior every day. And so what we do is we make sense of things, and we have to give that meaning so that we can make sure that it fits into our figure of how the world's supposed to work. And so that lets us walk through the day with a false sense of security because we have control of things. And what's happened recently has just shown us we never were, and we never will be in control. And that's fundamentally and foundationally a problem for lots of us. So what challenge? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, how do we cope with that? How do we recognize that, first of all? And then how can we kind of cope with it a little bit?
I think recognition is what we're seeing right now. And I think there's varying degrees. We go through these, you can call it, I think you and I were speaking briefly before we started talking and, about the stages of grief and letting, and it's like you're letting go of something that was really fundamental to you and you're trying to adopt and evolve into something else. And I think the first thing we have to do is give ourselves a certain amount of grace to do that. We're venturing into a territory that we're not comfortable with, so we're not going to get it right. And we should be, it's funny, I heard somebody say the other day, we should no longer be worried about hitting the bullseye, we should just hit the target, And I think that that's really important for us to give ourselves that bit of reprieve from perfection and evolving into and finding our new self. And then being able to be okay with that and being okay with it. I can control my actions, but I can't control the outcome. And I think that to be quite candid with you, I think goal orientation is a problem because I think we get so focused on the goal that we lose sight of the behaviors and activities we need to achieve the goal. And the goal may be obsolete by the time we get there. It's Eisenhower said, planning is indispensable, plans are useless.
Wow, could you give us an example of what you're talking about?
Well, any strategic plan. I mean, people right now, they throw up their arms and they're like, why even bother? Why bother planning? I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And I would agree with them. But I would agree that the plan isn't important, but the process that you use to develop your plan is what's important, because the minute you publish it or the minute you finish it, it's obsolete. but it isn't, the plan's not the point. The planning is the point. And it's having a process for yourself to accumulate information and figure out what my next steps are. And then it's like a constant set of experiments, because if we looked at our world and what we did as forming hypotheses, and then we go out and test them and we get data back and it tells us whether we're right or not. And that's really the way we should approach life. It isn't, I'm going to make X happen. I know X, Y, and Z. So therefore, if I do steps 1, 2, and 3, then I'll get my result. That usually leads to a sense of failure, because the thing that you're striving for may be obsolete by the time you get there.
Boy, I'll tell you, nobody understands that better than people who are self-employed, because you're always experimenting and testing things all the time.
Right.
So, yeah.
Most companies, and a lot of companies are adopting that mindset now. They're leaning more towards, okay, let's figure out what people need instead of what we want, what we have to offer. Because you're trying to find where those two things meet, right? And it's obviously very explicit for somebody that's self-employed or that you run your own business, because you do it every day. It's, we know what we do well internally. Does the world need that? You know, and if it doesn't need that, what does it need?
That's an amazing thing to say, because that's exactly what job search is about too. Because you're out there with experiences, successes, and maybe some skills that you've built, but you want to find an employer who needs those from you. And you want to be able to offer assistance and help to a company. That's why they're hiring you. So yeah, that's very key.
I think one of the challenges with that process, and I see it a lot from the employer side, right? Because I work with lots of business owners and people that hire. And in my mind, the flaw in that process is everybody is buying and selling in that process. You know, the people who have an open position are predisposed to find somebody to fill that position because they need somebody in the role, and the person who needs the role wants to put themselves in the position. And if I could give one bit of advice to people looking for jobs, it's find all the reasons not to take the job. Like, make sure you clearly understand if it's a good fit for you, because I cannot tell you the number of people I've seen come and go in organizations where, you know, I work with an assessment besides this. And one of the things we say is we hire people for what they can do and we fire them for who they are.
Boy, that's true. And it's tough.
Yeah.
It's pretty tough.
Well, it's tough because it's all about your financial health, right? I mean, I get it. It's, you know, if I'm unemployed, I need a job, and I certainly get that. And so so if I, you know, digress a minute and talk about threat levels in the brain, right? So we have three kind of threat levels in the brain. One is, you know, the broader environment. 2 is kind of in your neighborhood, and 3 is the threat is upon you. And as you go from 1 to 3, when you get into 3, your cognitive abilities go are lessened as you go up in threat level, because it's a natural way your brain works, right? Cortisol is released, and adrenaline, epinephrine, all that stuff. Right? So what happens is I lose access to my executive part of my brain. I lose access to my prefrontal cortex when I'm in threat mode. And so we really have to, I think right now, for everybody, whether you're employed or not, right now the biggest challenge for people is managing that threat level, because I think a lot of people find themselves in threat level 2 or 3 when they really shouldn't be. And it's detrimental, because you're going to have a lot of cortisol in your system, which is not good for your health. And second of all, you're losing access to the creative and critical thinking part of your brain, which again goes back to making decisions. And that's a challenge for folks.
How can we bring ourselves down a little bit so that we're not feeling so, I don't know, hyped up in a sense of alert all the time, which is exhausting, you know?
Yeah, and I think there are 3 components to that, right? And it's the same ones you hear from everybody, but I think, you know, what you eat, how you sleep, and how you take care of yourself. You know, and I think you know, there's the exercise component of that, but then I also think there's a contemplative routine everybody has to have, whatever that might be for you, whether it's journaling or walking or yoga or meditation or something, where you're reflecting back on your behaviors. And because there is no, there's a great quote I read the other day. It says, we only learn from reflection of the experience. We don't learn from an experience. We learn from our reflection on the experience. And so the hippocampus, the part of our brain that is responsible for memory. They talk about hippocampal activation, and that only happens in reflection, because when I experience something, if I never revisit the experience in my head to walk through what happened and what went well, what didn't go well, I'm not encoding anything into memory. I'm not really learning anything. And so I think having a contemplative routine, especially now where you can think about, even if you do it in the morning and briefly in the morning and at noon at night, which is, how do I feel right now? And then go one step further and think about, why do I feel that way? Like, what's driving that feeling for me? To really become attuned to the things that put you in threat mode and the things that remove you.
And I, and also I like to remind people that it's temporary. What you're feeling right now seems like the world is crashing around you, but it will pass. You just have to sit with it for a while, right? I always say there's no quick way around anything, only you just have to go through it, period.
Oh yeah, but I also think that this is I think that there's a saying, and I forget who said it, but it's never waste a good crisis, right? And so I think the bigger meta learning from this is, this will not be the last time something like this happens. So the one thing I would caution people is the mindset too much of, well, let's just get through this and then we'll be okay. You'll be okay until this happens again, right? These things are going to continue to be more frequent. I don't mean something like the actual COVID, but it could be some other situation. Like we had the 0809 thing, we had this, we have tsunamis, these things are happening more frequently. So we have to evolve to a point where we have a system for ourselves personally set up where we can deal with these things. So we're not going back and going, oh, I'm glad that's over. Now we'll have nothing else like that and we'll be fine for a couple of years. We may, or we may not.
Well, I think that's generally true about life, is there is no such thing as we've arrived. You never arrive. It's a constant process. And I have to think for a few minutes about my grandmother, who died at 96. She used to say all the time that the most important thing in life to accept is change, because that is all there is ever going to be. And if you can't deal with that or accept that or move through that, you're going to have a very difficult time with your life.
Yeah. Well, just from biologically, when something stops growing, it starts dying. And so the minute we stop as a human, that's one of the reasons I use the term relentless leadership. That the minute we stop moving forward, the minute we stop growing and learning and challenging, and any verb you want to use, the minute we take that minute and go, okay, now I don't have to do that anymore. Now I've got everything I need to be successful. Then that's when you start doing this, and the world doesn't stop. So even if you try to stop, you're going to fall behind because everything else is going to go like this. So you have to have the mindset that it isn't to be tiring of anything. It's just to be always looking for that next thing. How am I evolving? And we shouldn't be human beings. We should be human becomings. We should always be looking for the evolution of ourselves, especially as a leader, because people in leadership roles, the organization, which is really an artificial construct because it's a group of people, the group of people that you're leading, their needs in leadership are going to change when the outside world changes. And so as a leader, you have to constantly be evolving to figure out, am I being the leader my organization needs right now?
Yes, and I think we can ask ourselves the same thing. Am I leading myself the way that I should be leading myself? Which can probably be a tougher question, maybe, in isolation. I was going to say, let's leave the viewers with just 2 or 3 takeaways from this conversation. So it would be, understand that you really don't have control, right? Take a few minutes every day to check in with yourself, see how you feel, try to honor those feelings too. Don't judge them. I shouldn't be feeling this way. No, you feel this way, right? And can you tack on to that?
I think the last thing is then when you do those two things, then the next thing is, what are my next steps? Like Joan Baez said, the action is the antidote for despair. And I think that once you do the first two things, then it's okay. Well, what can I do? There's going to be a whole host of things you can't do. That's okay. Don't focus on those. Focus on the things you can do, because whatever you can do is going to make you feel better.
That's correct. And that's one of the first things I tell job seekers is, the first thing you should do is, you should take a few minutes to deal with the fact that you're unemployed. Just relax with it, sit with it, feel it, experience it. Then figure out what your routine is going to be and put some exercise in there and maybe some meditation, right? Then after that, that's when you can start developing a strategy. Who am I going to talk to and how am I going to do this? But, if you're not going with the flow a little bit, you're going to have a very hard time. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. You opened up so many other topics for discussion that I'm just gonna have to make some more videos.
Well, good. I hope it helps them. I hope it helps somebody.
No, I think it will. Absolutely. Thank you, Perry. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
and I had to comment too that, you're looking like the mountain man,
It's a quarantine beard. So, yep.
Well, too bad it's not winter, because
Exactly.
it's probably warm. Well, here's to everybody being able to get a haircut soon, and really to success in life. Just relax with it and just become, because that's what it's about, right? All right, everybody, have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us.